Hi everyone! Today we're finally talking about my SFAIH Pastel Markers. I've had this set for a little over a year now and I thought it would be fun to revisit them and share my updated thoughts. We're going to swatch every color, compare them to my Ohuhu markers, color a full page together, and by the end, I'll let you know if I still think they're worth adding to your collection. So let's get started. This is what the set looks like. It comes in a pretty standard carrying case. There's nothing particularly unique about it, but after having it for over a year, it does still hold up pretty well. Inside, you get 51 alcohol markers, a plastic page protector, and a swatch card. I usually just use a piece of cardstock instead, but they both do the same job, so if you don't already have something to put behind your page, it's definitely nice that they include one. As you can see, I filled my swatch card out when I first got the markers over a year ago, and you can probably tell it is quite a bit faded actually. Each marker has a brush tip on one side and a chisel tip on the other. Personally, I use the brush tip almost all of the time. Every once in a while, I'll reach for the chisel if I'm filling in a larger area, but if I were buying these today, I'd probably go with the brush and fine tip version instead. That's just my personal preference though. I personally love this soft pastel color palette and I was really happy with how all of these pages came together. Honestly, I think they all turned out really well. I never ran into any issues while coloring them. The markers, they blended nicely and everything just worked the way I expected it to. I think these pages are a pretty good example of what you can create with this set. Now let's compare them to my Ohuhu markers. Starting with the packaging, they look pretty similar at first glance. The branding on the Ohuhu markers is a little bit more distinct, while the SFAIH ones have a much simpler design. As for the tips, they're set up pretty much the same. Both of these are brush and chisel versions. Now let's compare what everybody is probably the most curious about, which is the colors. One of the main reasons I wanted to do this comparison is because these markers use the original Ohuhu color codes. Ohuhu has since updated their coding system, but because they still use those original codes, a lot of people have wondered whether the matching colors are actually the same. So I thought the easiest way to answer that was to swatch every single SFAIH marker right next to its matching Ohuhu color. Now we're getting into one of the sections where the colors do start to separate a little more. This is probably the biggest difference you'll see throughout the comparison. After this section though, they go right back to being very similar colors again. Even while swatching them, they both lay down colors smoothly, they're easy to work with, and nothing immediately stands out as feeling dramatically different. So overall, I think this comparison really speaks for itself. Most of the colors are extremely similar with just a handful that stand out as being noticeably different. Hopefully, seeing them side by side like this gives you a much better idea of how these compare than just looking at the marker caps, because we all know those are not accurate most of the time. Now that we've gone through every single color, here's a closer look at all of the swatches side by side. Overall, I was honestly impressed with how similar so many of these colors are. There were definitely a handful that stood out as being noticeably different, especially some of those yellows and yellow reds. So now that we've looked at the colors, let's actually put them to use. For today's coloring demo, I'm going to be coloring this really cute pool party page from Cozy Cuties by Coco Wayo. This set does come with the plastic page protector, but personally I prefer using cardstock instead. So let's jump into the coloring, where I'll chat a little more about my experience with the set as we go. Overall, after spending the last few weeks coloring with these markers again, I can honestly say my opinion hasn't really changed from when I first got them. I still think these are a really enjoyable set to color with. One thing I noticed while revisiting them is that I just wasn't thinking about the markers very much, and I actually mean that as a compliment. They weren't fighting me, they weren't difficult to blend, and I wasn't constantly wishing they behaved differently. I could just sit down, relax, and enjoy coloring, and I think that's exactly what you want from a marker set. Right here, I'm actually using one of my favorite alcohol marker techniques. Even though this is called a colorless blender, I don't actually use it very often for blending. I use it more as a way to create lighter colors. I'll lay down the blender first and then go over it with my light blue. Since there's already alcohol in the paper, it naturally lightens that area and creates a soft gradient without needing another marker. It's just one of those little tricks I use all the time, no matter what brand of alcohol markers I'm coloring with. Something that I think is important to mention is that even though this is a pastel set, these still aren't what I would consider ultralight pastel colors. They're beautiful and soft colors, but if you're looking for those really pale, muted pastels, those honestly aren't very common in alcohol marker sets in general. The only set that I've personally found that has those lighter shades is my Artex pastel set, so that's one of the reasons I love this little trick so much. Now, as I'm working through the rest of the page, one thing I really appreciate is the overall color selection. There's only 51 markers in the set, but everything feels like it belongs together. I think that's one of the set's biggest strengths. The palette feels really cohesive, so choosing colors is actually pretty easy. Another thing I noticed while using these again is just how nicely they layer, since there's definitely times when I want a little bit more depth than a single layer gives me. Most of the time, I'll just go back over the same area a second or even a third time, or just however many layers it takes to get the depth that I'm looking for. Layering like this deepens the color without really changing the hue, and it's something I find myself doing pretty often. So speaking of layering, I think this is probably a good time to start talking about how these markers have held up after a year. Overall, I don't really have any major complaints. They still color just as smoothly as I remember. I haven't had any issues with them drying out, and they're still a set that I genuinely enjoy reaching for. Now, there are a couple of things I've noticed over time. First is the brush tips. I do think they soften a little bit faster than my Ohuhu markers. They still work perfectly fine, but after a lot of use, they aren't quite as firm as they were when they were brand new. The nice thing though is that these brush nibs are reversible. So if one side starts wearing down, you can simply pull the nib out, flip it around, and give yourself a fresh tip. It's a nice little feature that definitely helps extend the life of these markers. The other thing I've noticed is that the caps can be a little tight sometimes. Every once in a while, they take a pretty good pull to get off. It isn't something that happens with every marker, and it isn't a deal breaker for me personally, but it is something I have consistently noticed with this set. So if hand strength is something you struggle with, that's worth keeping in mind. There actually was one time where I pulled on a cap so hard that the marker barrel separated instead. It was definitely surprising, but I was able to put it right back together and haven't had any issues with it since. It only happened once, but I figured it was still worth mentioning. Other than those couple of things, I honestly think they've held up really well. Looking back at all of the pages I've colored over the past year, I haven't noticed any unusual yellowing, which can sometimes be a concern with some alcohol markers. The markers themselves still perform consistently, and I enjoy coloring with them just as much as I did when I first got them. Once again, here's another place I really think these markers shine. Because the colors are already pretty close together, blending between them is actually really easy to make this sunset. I don't feel like I have to fight to get that smooth transition. The colors literally just melt into each other, and I think it's one of the biggest reasons I've enjoyed coloring with this set so much. That's probably one of the best compliments I can give an alcohol marker set, so a year later and I'm still looking forward to pulling this set back out. That's a win. One area that I don't quite like is the greens. It's not that they're bad greens, they're just not always the exact shades that I naturally gravitate towards. So here's another little trick I use. Before I lay down the green, I actually put a layer of yellow underneath. Then when I go back over it with the green, it shifts it just enough towards that warmer yellow green that I personally prefer. It's a really simple technique, and I find myself using it whenever I'm working with a more limited color palette. Honestly, little things like this are why I don't get too hung up on a marker set not having every perfect color. There are a lot of ways to tweak colors and make them work for the look you're going for. right here, I'm using another little trick that I rely on pretty often, and yes, it's with the greens again. Instead of trying to make the green darker by layering it over and over again, I actually put down a layer of gray first and then go back over it with the green. Rather than making the green more saturated, it creates a softer, shadowed version of that same color, which I think works really well for this scene. So, who do I think these markers are a good fit for? I'd say they're a good option for someone who's looking for a more budget-friendly alcohol marker set, or for someone who really enjoys softer pastel color palettes. Now, if you already own a larger Ohuhu collection, you probably noticed from the swatches that there's quite a bit of overlap between the two. That doesn't necessarily mean I wouldn't recommend these. If you want to buy a second set to keep in another room, you enjoy trying different brands, or you just like collecting art supplies, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I just think it's helpful to know what you're getting before you buy them. For me personally, if I already had a large Ohuhu collection and was looking specifically for new colors, this probably wouldn't be the set I would choose, just because there are so many shades that are super similar. But if I was shopping for my first alcohol marker set, or I wanted something that gave me a very similar color experience without spending quite as much money, I think these would be a really solid choice. As of filming this in early August 2026, I've also been seeing the SFAIH markers go on some really good sales on Amazon. Prices can obviously change, but right now there's a pretty noticeable difference between these and the Ohuhu sets, especially as you move into the higher color counts. When I first bought my markers, I actually purchased this pastel set around the same time as my Ohuhu markers. I didn't realize just how much overlap there was between the colors, and I don't believe that SFAIH even offered the larger sets that they have available now. Looking back, if I were completely new to alcohol markers and choosing my first larger collection today, I honestly think I would strongly consider starting with the SFAIH. They're much more budget friendly, the coloring experience is very similar, and I could always decide later on whether upgrading or adding another brand made sense for me. At the end of the day, everybody colors differently, everybody has a different budget, different preferences, and different things that they look for in their art supplies. My goal with reviews like this isn't to tell you what you should or shouldn't buy, it's simply to share my experience, point out things I've noticed, and hopefully give you enough information to decide whether a product is a good fit for you. And for me, after using these on and off for a little over a year, I can honestly say I still think they're a really good set. And now, after adding all of the acrylic details, this is what the final page looks like. I love how it turned out. It has those bright, happy, pastel summer vibes that I was going for, and I think this color palette came together exactly how I envisioned it. Hopefully this review was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know down in the comments below. I'd be more than happy to answer them. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!